Denn als unsere Partei gerade 7-mal hoch war.
The winner to organize the 2022 FIFA World Cup is Qatar.
To host the Cup, the tiny Gulf nation went on a stadium-building spree, bringing in thousands upon thousands of migrant laborers.
The tournament is highly controversial and expensive. The costs have already exceeded $200 billion and could go even higher.
Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Bahrain, and others have cut diplomatic ties over what they say is Qatar's support of terrorist groups.
They let oppressive regimes host major events. They let dictators organize the Olympics. Sportswashing makes you forget a country's pride. Instead, you see the wonderful opening ceremonies. You see hundreds of athletes enjoying themselves.
Hi everybody! The FIFA World Cup 2022 in Qatar has been the most sensational event of the year after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And by now, you all must have already heard about the bizarre economics behind this World Cup. For those who don't know, while South Africa spent $3.6 billion into hosting the World Cup, Brazil spent $15 billion and Russia spent $11.6 billion. But Qatar alone has already spent over $200 billion just into hosting the World Cup. Now mind you, we are talking about a country that is practically a desert. But the Qatari government has pulled off such a miracle that they built 7 new stadiums, brand new roads, countless hotels, a new metro system, and even have air conditioning for the imported grass that they've grown. Now, considering the fact that FIFA is the most sensational sports event in the world, most people would think all this money is worth it and World Cup is an extremely profitable event, right? Well, guess what? Hosting both the World Cup and the Olympics is a complete waste of money because while the host country has to bear all the expenses of these super expensive infrastructure projects, all the significant revenue through ticketing, merchandise and sponsorship actually go to FIFA. In fact, immediately after the World Cup, these stadiums and infra turn into such a wasteful expenditure that this Brazilian World Cup stadium is now being used as a bus depot. And in Qatar's case, even after spending $200 billion, Qatar is only expected to make $15 to $20 billion in return. Now this begs the question, why is Qatar hosting the FIFA World Cup in spite of it being such a ridiculous waste of money? What is Qatar's hidden geopolitical strategy behind this World Cup? And most importantly, since this is an epitome of propaganda, as students of marketing, what are the study materials to help you understand the depth of marketing and propaganda better? This video is brought to you by IDFC First Bank, but more on this at the end of the video. To understand this deep story, we first have to understand the vulnerabilities of Qatar and how much Qatar is in danger. The first problem that Qatar has is the over-dependence on oil and gas. And if you look at their GDP, almost 60% of their GDP comes only from oil and gas. And considering the speedy action of the world against climate change, if you look at this graph by British Petroleum, it says that considering the fact that 4 out of the 6 biggest oil buyers in the world intend to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, the demand for oil will slow down by 71%. Meanwhile, as you can see from this graph, the cost of renewable energy has already started dropping below the fossil fuel cost. So Qatar can no longer depend on oil beyond 2050. This is the first problem that Qatar has. The second problem is Qatar's location. Now, if you look at the map, Qatar is surrounded by rivals from all directions. These countries are Saudi Arabia, Egypt, UAE and Bahrain. And as you can see, these are not ordinary rivals but include 2 of the most powerful oil countries on the planet, which are Saudi and UAE. And the only reason why Qatar is surviving until now is because of a security guarantee from the US. So in the next 30 years, when oil and gas are no longer valuable, if the US withdraws its guarantee, it won't take a lot of time for its neighbors to conquer Qatar. And Qatar's own army is so small that it has only 22,000 men. In fact, even for the World Cup, they had to import the Pakistani army for help. This is the reason why not just Qatar, but every other Middle Eastern country is trying to diversify their income so that they can have a source of revenue and an alternate instrument of leverage in geopolitics. Now, if you look at other countries, they all have some very significant diversification instruments. For example, for UAE, it is a financial and transshipment hub in the form of Dubai. And for Saudi, it is this critical access to the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. And this is extremely important because 30% of the entire world's container traffic flows through the Suez Canal. So if Saudi wants a source of revenue, they can start charging all the ships and make money out of sea toll. But if you look at Qatar, it is on the other side of the land and it is nowhere close to UAE in terms of diversification. This is the second problem that Qatar has. And this brings us to the last problem of Qatar, and that is its global image. Now people, when I say Dubai, you can imagine the magnificent infrastructure there, right? When I say New York, you can imagine the Madison Square Garden, right? But when I say Qatar, what comes to your mind? Nothing except desert, isn't it? This is again one of the biggest problems of Qatar, which is global perception. So to put that straight, Qatar is on a clock to solve three major challenges by 2050. Number one is economic diversification from oil. Number two is to keep long-standing security guarantee even after oil gets over. And the last challenge is to improve its image in front of foreign investors. So the question is, how is Qatar trying to fix these problems, and what is the connection of these problems with the World Cup? Well, the first part of this answer lies in something called sportswashing. To tell you about it, sportswashing is a public relations strategy that is deployed to clean up the image of a country in the eyes of the international audience. In simple words, it's nothing but a tool of propaganda. And it's not just Qatar, the strategy of sportswashing has been deployed ever since the times of Hitler.
Als unsere Partei gerade 7 Mann hoch war, brach sich auf 2 Grundsätze aus.
The city of Berlin was awarded the auspicious task of hosting the 1936 Summer Olympic Games. It would be the first time a host nation would project its political ideology and power onto the world.
The German athletes were soldiers on the propaganda battlefield.
Berlin is cleaned up. Anti-Jewish signs were removed. Everything was done to create the impression that this was a hospitable climate.
No one could have predicted was that these games would be used as a tool for some of the slickest propaganda by one of the most tyrannical regimes the world has ever seen.
To tell you about it, if you remember, in 1923, Germany had witnessed one of the most terrible hyperinflations in the world. And the condition was so bad that in early 1922, 160 German marks was equivalent to $1. But by November 1923, the currency had depreciated so much that the same $1 was equal to 4.2 trillion German marks.
1923 was disastrous for Germany. In that year, the great German inflation reached its peak. For some time, the value of the mark had been dropping. And as the value of the notes decreased, so the amount of notes needed to buy things grew. To meet this crisis and pay the strikers in the Ruhr, the government simply printed more money. And as it lost its value, so it cost more and more to pay wages, to buy food. Millions, whatever figure was printed on the notes, really meant nothing. The German mark was worthless.
And this led to severe unemployment, starvation and poverty. And everybody around the world saw Germany as a failed, impoverished nation. But in the next 10 years, Germany had made some progress and they wanted to show the world what Germany looked like in the 1930s. This was one of the most important reasons why Germany won the bid to host the 1936 Olympics in 1931. But in between, Germany was in for a surprise because in 1933, Hitler became the dictator of Germany and the entire world had heard rumors about the racism against Jews in Germany. But this is when the propaganda minister of Hitler saw Olympics as the best opportunity to show three things to the world. Number one, they wanted to show what new Germany under Hitler looked like. Number two, they want to prove that dictatorship of Hitler was far better than the democracies in Europe. And lastly, they wanted to market the idea of the Aryan race to the world. And here's the most ironic fact of all. Hitler actually released hundreds of pigeons in the ceremony as a message of peace to the world. And guess what? The 1936 Olympics was the first Olympic event to be broadcasted on television. So it was by far the most powerful tool of propaganda. On top of that, during the games, the signs of banning Jews from public places had disappeared. The Germans were ordered to be very nice to everyone, especially African Americans. Why? Because back then, with the ongoing racism against black athletes in US and Europe, when these athletes came to Germany, they were delighted delighted to see the kind of respect and hospitality that they got in Germany. So when they went back home, the stories of equality and hospitality of Germany traveled all across the world. In fact, one of these black athletes said to the press that Germany treated him so well that he didn't have to sit in the back of the bus. Similarly, many reporters wrote good things about Germany in their newspapers. So just like Hitler wanted, the people of the world actually saw how much Germany has developed in just 13 years in spite of witnessing the worst economic crisis in its history. And this change in perception is what gave Hitler immense power both inside Germany and outside Germany. This is how sports washing works. So ever since Hitler did it, even other leaders have done it. For example, Africa is often portrayed as a backward, impoverished and conflicted region, right? In fact, even if I ask you what Ethiopia looks like, the picture in our minds is that of a primitive country, isn't it? But when I say South Africa and Cape Town, do you see the same kind of picture? No, right? Why? Because we have seen how beautiful South Africa looks like in our cricket matches. We saw the 2007 T20 World Cup hosted in South Africa together. And we've also seen legends like AB de Villiers, Dale Steyn, Jonty Rhodes and Faf du Plessis play cricket in India. So we do not have that kind of image about South Africa, right? That is the power of sports washing. In fact, this is the reason why South Africa held the FIFA World Cup in 2010. This is what sports washing strategy is deployed for. And if you look at Qatar, this is exactly what Qatar is doing. So just like Germany wanted to show off their new German developments, Qatar is hosting the World Cup to show the world that Qatar is not just a desert that found oil, but a fully developed and modern country. And here's a look at the incredible architecture of Qatar. And secondly, just like Russia wanted to sweep its war progression under the carpet of World Cup publicity in 2018, Qatar wants to sweep its human rights violation, homosexual abuses and military funding like subjects under the carpet of World Cup publicity in 2022. Because this is what the dark side of Qatar looks like.
Evidence that migrants working on infrastructure projects in the final months before the tournament have died or suffered abuse.
Migrant workers who built the massive soccer stadiums endured unsanitary conditions in extreme heat. Injuries and deaths have been reported.
Now, how successful Qatar will be in sports washing, only time will tell. And this brings me to the second compelling reason for Qatar hosting the World Cup, and that is foreign investments. You see guys, World Cup is one of the many avenues for Qatar to be on the spotlight and invite global investments. So if you see, now that so many rich investors and bankers see and visit Qatar, the World Cup almost serves like an expo to help them see the infrastructure of Qatar. In fact, this is the reason why Qatar has even found a way to entice its investors through various schemes such as exemption from income tax for 10 years, exemption from import duty on raw materials and lucrative land allocation projects. As a result, foreign investment in Qatar is expected to flow faster in the next 5 years. This is how Qatar is using the World Cup to clean up its image and invite new investors. Now again, how far they'll be successful, only time will tell. And this brings us to the last instrument of Qatar's diversification, which is something called the Qatar Investment Authority. This is nothing but a wealth fund that decides where to invest the unlimited cash that Qataris have. And if you look at their investments, it will blow your mind. Fun fact over here is that Qatar owns even more property in the UK than the King of England himself. And while UK companies own 21% of the 15 most expensive skyscrapers in London, Qatar alone owns 34% of those skyscrapers. But that's not all. They even bought the Paris Saint-Germain football club in 2011, which then went on to win 4 French Soccer League titles. On top of that, Qatar is also an investor in London Heathrow Airport, St. Petersburg Airport in Russia, the Volkswagen Group, the Royal Dutch Shell, the Bank of America and even the Barclays Bank. Cherry on the cake, they have even invested in Uber and expanded in Silicon Valley and even invested in New York real estate. Now most people might ask, why is Qatar buying up so much property? Well, I would like to make a separate video on that, but long story short, when you buy or fund any big leagues, when you buy giant properties in one particular country, you get access to the most powerful people in that country. This includes business magnates, government officials and even celebrities. So that way, you can divert your money to fund a political party, influence government policies, and eventually profit your economy by billions, if not trillions of dollars. A classic example of the same is Gazprom.
Now, the Russian energy giant Gazprom
are a Russian state energy company, one of the biggest backers of UEFA. They've been an official UEFA commercial partner since 2012, and their current deal is worth about £30 million a year to UEFA.
Gazprom is the Russian state gas company, and they were one of the biggest sponsors of UEFA and many other football events. On top of that, a Russian oligarch had even bought Chelsea, which was by far one of the most valuable clubs in the world. So slowly, by buying into these big leagues, Putin had built such a great relationship within the European circle that the German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder lobbied for the Russian gas in Germany. As a result, Germany got dependent on Russian gas. And now, we all know how that has turned into a nightmare for Germany.
Gerhard Schröder is a long-standing friend of Putin's. Soon after leaving office in 2005, he accepted a job with Russian energy company Gazprom. Schröder has refused to distance himself from the Russian leader.
Similarly, when Qatar buys so much property and Qatari billionaires get into the inner circle of the most powerful people in the world, they can put their money to good use by tweaking the government policies around the world to favor Qatar. This is how, through sports washing, through sports investment, by enticing foreign investment, and by getting into the most powerful circles in the world, the Qatari government is doing everything in its capacity to make a name for itself in the global economy. This is the story of Qatar, a nation that is struggling to prevent its blessing from turning into a curse. And this brings me to the last part of the episode, and that are the study materials to help you understand propaganda and geopolitics better. Moving on, there is one bank in India that is surely going to make a name for itself for the right reasons. And that is our partners for today's episode, and that is IDFC First Bank. IDFC First Bank is a new age bank that's revolutionizing the way India banks. What I love about them is that they are on a mission to create the world's most customer-friendly bank. And I genuinely think that their products and services are designed for that mission. Where most banks offer interest rates of 3 to 3.5% per annum, IDFC First Bank's interest rates start at 4% per annum. And on balances of rupees 10 lakhs and above, you earn 6.25% per annum. And if you feel this is extraordinary, wait until you hear about their credit cards. IDFC First credit cards have zero annual charges and zero joining fees. But what's more important is that there are no minimum spend conditions, whereas most of the banks waive annual fees subject to these minimum spend conditions. On IDFC First Bank's credit cards, you pay zero interest on ATM cash withdrawal till the due date. All you pay is a flat fee of 199 rupees per withdrawal. Most other banks charge you interest from the moment you withdraw cash and also charge a fee of 250 rupees per withdrawal. And not just that, at IDFC First Bank, the credit card reward points never expire, and these reward points can be redeemed on any online purchase. So these reward points are as good as cash. Yes, you heard that right. Now, isn't that customer friendly? If this sounds useful to you, go open an IDFC First Bank's savings account or get a credit card and get incremental value through their customer friendly products through the link in the description. Moving on to the study materials, the first thing I'm attaching is a book called Propaganda by Edward Barnes. Secondly, I am attaching a Johnny Harris episode which will help you understand how Qatar uses its money to get into the most powerful circles in the world. And thirdly, I am attaching a Vox video which will help you understand the conflicts in the Middle East better. So do have a look at them and let me know what you think. And remember, you can either open your IDFC First Savings bank account or apply for a credit card and get up to 10x rewards on the money you spend for the things that you love the most. The link to apply is in the description. So go for it. That's all from my side for today, guys. If you learned something valuable, please make sure to hit the like button in order to make YouTube Baba happy. And for more such insightful business and political case studies, please subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.